The spreadsheet landed on my desk like a weapon. Care to explain this disaster? Nathan Briggs's voice split across the open plan office. Conversations stopped. Chairs turned. 30 people had front row seats to my humiliation and not one of them looked away. I stared at the report in front of me. Every number was mine. Every chart was mine. Every paragraph of analysis had been written by me across 2 consecutive late evenings. I had formatted every slide, checked every figure 3 times, and uploaded the finished file to Nathan's folder before midnight on Tuesday. My thinking on every page. His name on the front. He folded his arms and shook his head slowly, performing the disappointed teacher with practiced ease. Then he leaned close enough that only I could hear and smiled while he spoke. If the director asks about this, you're taking the blame. Or I'll make sure you're gone by Friday. My hands went cold under the desk. I kept my face completely still. In that moment, staring at a report I had spent 12 hours building, I understood something clearly for the first time. This was not just a bad boss. This was a man carefully preparing a scapegoat. And he had already chosen me. Nobody defended me. Not a single person in that office said a word. The room absorbed the moment and moved on. Keyboards restarted, phone calls resumed, 30 people returned to their screens as though nothing had happened. These things dissolved quickly in open offices. Everyone knew that. Everyone relied on it. They also knew who Nathan Briggs was. 7 years at Radcliffe Solutions. Line manager to 8 junior staff. The kind of person who shaped performance reviews, approved leave requests, and could frame your career in a single quiet conversation with the right director. Challenging him publicly was a calculation nobody wanted to make. So nobody made it. Nathan walked away with his hands in his pockets, unhurried and composed. He had done what he came to do. If that report drew scrutiny from above, the room had just watched him redirect the responsibility onto me. I stared at the spreadsheet in front of me. My breathing was steady. Not because I was unaffected, but because something had shifted quietly inside me, the way a stone settles to the bottom of still water and stays. Not panic. Not fear. Something much more useful. A plan. My name is Amelia Clarke. I am 28 years old, originally from Kent, and the first person in my immediate family to work in professional services. My mum spent years cleaning other people's offices. My younger brother, Callum, was halfway through a business degree in Leeds. When I got the job at Radcliffe Solutions, a consulting firm in central London advising mid-sized businesses on financial strategy and market positioning, I treated it as if everything depended on it. Because it did. I arrived early. I stayed late. I learned the client accounts faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months I understood the firm's portfolio better than colleagues who had been there for years. The work was genuinely interesting and I was good at it. Then Nathan Briggs became my supervisor. And for the 9 months that followed, I did not just do my own job. I did his. Reports. Financial models. Client presentations. Competitive analysis. Strategy documents for accounts I had never been formally introduced to. All of it built by my hands. All of it delivered under his name. That is where this story begins. Or at least, that is where this particular chapter of it begins. It started so small I almost let it pass. 6 weeks after joining, on a Thursday evening when most of the floor had cleared, Nathan appeared at my desk with a manila folder and a casual expression. "Quick one before you go," he said. "Client summary I didn't manage to finish. Needs to go out tonight." The folder was thick. This was not a quick favor. "How much needs doing?" I asked. "Most of it," he said, already walking away. "You'll figure it out." I stayed until 8:30. I read his raw notes, restructured the summary, sourced the figures, and formatted everything from scratch. I sent it to his folder at 8:49. The next morning Nathan presented it in the boardroom. He spoke about the client's position with the calm confidence of someone who had spent hours on it. He answered 2 follow-up questions without hesitation. Everyone praised the quality of the work. He did not mention my name once. When the meeting ended, he walked past my desk without stopping and gave one small, easy wink. That was the first warning. I told myself it was a one-off. I was wrong. Within 2 months, the word favor had quietly disappeared. Favors implied choice. What replaced them was settled expectation. Silent, consistent, arriving every afternoon around 4 without explanation or negotiation. Nathan would come by my desk, set a folder down, and return to his office or leave the building. Reports. Presentations. Market analysis. Client briefings.
The work varied. The timing never did.
His name was already printed on the front of every document he left. I would work through whatever he had dropped while the office emptied around me. The cleaners would come through. The security guard would nod on his rounds. I would finish around 8 or 9, take the tube home through the dark, and be back at my desk by 8 the following morning. Nathan would arrive at 9:30. Rested. He would collect the finished work from his shared folder, brief himself on it for 20 minutes, and walk into whatever meeting required it looking completely in command. He had the confident ease of someone whose work was always delivered on time.
Because it always was.
The fact that someone else delivered it appeared nowhere in his performance record. But it was building, precisely and without interruption, in mine.
In the 4th month, I pushed back. It was a Tuesday evening.
Nathan had left a 40-page strategy document on my chair with a note, by 8 a.m.
He was already reaching for his coat.
"This is your project," I said. "Your name is on the brief."
He stopped and turned around slowly.
"You're still on probation, Amelia."
Flat. Factual.
The tone of someone reading out a bus timetable. "Wouldn't want the directors thinking you're struggling to keep up." A small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. "That kind of reputation follows people."
He picked up his bag and left. I sat without moving for nearly a full minute.
The message needed no interpretation. Cooperate, or face a probation review written entirely from his account of my performance.
He was my line manager.
His version of events would carry real weight before I had built any credible counter-narrative.
I did not have that counter-narrative yet.
I turned back to the document and began reading.
But I had understood something new that evening.
If this situation was going to end differently, I was going to have to be the one who made it end. People always ask why I did not simply leave. The answer is the one that millions of people give, and it does not feel less real for being common. London rent consumed almost half my monthly salary. My flat in Peckham was the cheapest livable option I had found after 3 weeks of searching. Walking away meant gap months, savings disappearing, and applications that could take 3 months to convert into anything comparable.
But it was not only about me.
My mum's knee had deteriorated to the point where she had cut her cleaning shifts from 5 mornings a week to 3. The difference in her income was exactly the amount I transferred to her every month.
She never asked for it. She did not need to.
And Callum was in his 2nd year in Leeds on the minimum loan because I had made him a promise.
He was doing well.
His grades were good. I was not going to be the reason that changed.
Nathan did not know the specifics. He did not need to.
He had worked in this industry long enough to recognize the general shape of a junior employee who could not afford to walk away.
It is a recognizable shape.
He had identified mine and calculated correctly. What he had not calculated was what I intended to do with the time he thought he had bought. Late nights teach you things that no daytime meeting ever could. When the floor is empty and the only sound is the ventilation system and your own keyboard, you stop performing and simply practice. You see which projects are actually holding the department together. You understand which client relationships depend on consistent, detailed work done outside office hours. You learn which reports get real scrutiny from the people who matter. And you learn, with a clarity that daylight softens, what the person whose name sits on your work actually contributes. By month 5 the picture was plain.
Nathan was a skilled manager of perception.
He occupied the right rooms, said the right things, and projected the image of someone always on top of his portfolio.
The performance was practiced and convincing.
But the substance, the actual financial analysis, the modeling, the sector research, the detailed client work his performance depended on, was built by me, in the evenings, while he was elsewhere.
He could not have produced the quarterly client review without me. He could not have answered the boardroom questions without the briefing notes I had prepared the night before. Nathan did not only exploit my position. He depended on it.
And in the quiet clarity of a late evening, I understood something important.
Being needed is not the same as being powerless.
There was one name that appeared consistently on the firm's most important internal communications.
Arthur Langford,
founder of Radcliffe Solutions. The person who had started the firm 18 years ago as a 2-person operation and built it into a 50-person consultancy with offices in London and Edinburgh and a reputation for analytical rigor that most firms in the sector could not match. Arthur was not involved in day-to-day management, but he maintained close oversight on anything touching the firm's key client relationships, reading significant reports, signing off on major recommendations, attending presentations where the firm's credibility was most directly at stake. I had seen him in person perhaps 4 or 5 times over 9 months.
He kept an office on the 4th floor and used it properly.
But when he appeared in meetings, I paid attention.
He was quiet in a way that felt precise rather than passive. He listened with a particular kind of focus that made you careful about every word you chose. He asked questions about the numbers, specific questions that told you he had read the document carefully and understood exactly where the reasoning needed to be tested. Nathan always answered those questions with complete confidence. I had always noticed when the confidence ran slightly ahead of the understanding. I had wondered, quietly, whether Arthur noticed too. In the 6th month I made a quiet decision. I stopped arguing with Nathan. Stopped sighing. Stopped giving any visible signal that the arrangement was anything other than entirely normal. But I started doing something deliberate. Every report I produced, I saved a clean copy in a personal folder sorted by date. Every spreadsheet I built, I exported a version with the metadata preserved, the creation timestamp, the edit history, the document properties recording who had built the original and when. When a document went through multiple drafts, I kept each version. I started a work log. A plain document updated each evening before leaving. Date. Task completed. Time spent. Whether the work appeared under Nathan's name in a client deliverable the following day. I was not building a legal case. I was not preparing a confrontation. I simply decided that if Nathan was going to use my work, the accurate record of its authorship would exist somewhere, clean, dated, and retrievable. I did not know when that record would matter. I knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent enough late evenings thinking clearly, that it eventually would. So I maintained it exactly the way I maintained everything else. Carefully. Consistently. Without a single gap. The email arrived on a Wednesday evening at 6:43. I was the last person on the floor. The lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting and the room was quiet except for the sound of the ventilation and my own keyboard. I was finishing a revenue model Nathan had left on my desk at 4:30, 3 product lines, 2 geographic markets, a full sensitivity analysis. I was nearly done. A new message appeared in my inbox. From Arthur Langford. Subject, quick clarification. My fingers stopped moving. I opened the message. He had a question about the forecasting methodology in a financial model presented in a board-level meeting earlier that day. Nathan had presented it. The model was entirely mine, my structural approach, my assumption framework, my formatting conventions. Arthur was asking about one of the core inputs. The message was addressed to Nathan. I was copied in. I read the question twice. It was specific and intelligent, the kind of question you only ask if you have read the document carefully and understood enough to know where the logic needed to be verified. Nathan had not built the model. He would not be able to answer it with any precision. I sat with that realization for a moment. Then I opened a new reply window, addressed it to both of them, and began to type. I kept my response short and completely accurate. I explained the assumption Arthur had asked about, the data source behind it, the reasoning that had shaped the input range, and why I had structured the sensitivity analysis the way I had. I answered his exact question directly. Then I added one short paragraph flagging a related consideration the presentation had not covered but that I believed was worth his attention. No complaints. No suggestion of anything improper. No positioning against Nathan. I was simply a person who had built a model, answering a precise question about how it worked. I reread the reply twice, checked the tone, checked the numbers, and pressed send at 6:58. At 7:01, a reply arrived. Very helpful, Amelia. Thank you. 7 words. No elaboration. I read those 7 words 3 times in a dim, near-empty office. Arthur Langford had just learned my name. Not as a team member listed on an organizational chart. Not as a background figure 2 rows behind Nathan in the quarterly briefing. As the person who could explain exactly how a complex financial model had been built. I saved the exchange in a separate folder. Then I finished the revenue model and went home. It happened again the following week. A question about a client forecast in a report Nathan had submitted under his own name. A few days later, a follow-up about a market sizing calculation from a previous presentation. Each time I replied with the same approach, clear, accurate, professional, entirely free of complaint. Each time Arthur responded with a short acknowledgement. Always attentive. Always specific. Always the kind of follow-up that told you the first answer had been read properly. Then on a Thursday afternoon, about 3 weeks after his first email, Arthur came down to my floor. He walked through the main office at a regular pace and stopped beside my desk. Quick question about the growth forecast, last week's client pack. We talked for 4 minutes. I showed him the underlying data on my screen. He asked one follow-up. I explained it. He nodded and left. From across the office, I could feel Nathan watching. I did not look at him. When Arthur had gone, I turned back to my screen and kept working. But the room felt different. Nathan had noticed the exchange. I could feel a new tension between his office and my desk, thin but present, like a wire pulled slightly tighter than before. Something had changed. For the first time in months, it had not changed in his favor. Most people, when they sense the ground shifting beneath them, become more careful. Nathan became louder. In the weeks after Arthur began coming to my desk with questions, Nathan performed his business with greater intensity. In team meetings he spoke at length about the complexity of his workload. In conversations with senior colleagues, within deliberate earshot of others, he described himself as overwhelmed and referenced the volume he was managing. He adopted the language of a person stretched to capacity. Meanwhile, every afternoon around 4 o'clock, a folder still landed on my desk. The pattern had not changed. If anything, his requests came with more urgency, tighter notes, closer deadlines, as though he felt something shifting and needed to accelerate his output. His output, which was my output. He believed something very simple, that 7 years of accumulated visibility at this firm was a permanent structural advantage. That the relationships he had built above him were strong enough to absorb any quiet questions. That I would eventually exhaust myself or make a mistake, and that either outcome would restore the balance. He believed I would stay invisible forever. It was, in its way, a reasonable belief. It was also the one that would cost him everything. In the 8th month, a significant project arrived at Radcliffe Solutions. A major retail client needed a full strategic review, market position, operational gaps across 3 divisions, and fully modeled growth options for their board over a 3-year horizon. 3-week deadline. The kind of work that ended up in the firm's portfolio for years. Nathan received the brief on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, the entire research package was on my chair with a handwritten note. Handle the full analysis. I'll take care of the narrative. He was already leaving. I looked at the package, the brief, the background files, the data room details, for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop and began. But there was something I did not yet know, something that would have changed the weight of that moment considerably. Arthur Langford was overseeing this project personally. Not delegating to a director. Not reviewing the output at the end. He was involved at every stage, checking the analytical approach, reviewing interim findings, and attending the final presentation himself. I found this out on Tuesday morning when he sent a short project email. My name was on the distribution list. Nathan's was above mine. But I was on it. Presentation day was a Thursday morning. The conference room had been set up since 8, 10 chairs around the long table, printed copies at every seat. The client team arrived at 9. 2 of their directors and their head of strategy. Arthur sat at the head of the table with the deck already open in front of him. Nathan stood at the front with the clicker. Dressed sharply. Composed. The image of someone in complete command of the room. He presented my slides. He walked through my market analysis, my gap findings across the 3 divisions, and my 3 modeled growth scenarios. He delivered his own narrative section, the one part of the deck genuinely his, and he did it well. He had always been an assured presenter. Then Arthur raised one hand. Interesting, he said, looking at the second growth scenario. He paused. Walk me through the forecasting model. Specifically, how are the margin assumptions derived? The room stayed quiet. Nathan smiled, clicked forward, and began to explain. I sat along the side wall with the printed deck open in my lap, and I watched his explanation go vague within 30 seconds, then hesitant within a minute, then genuinely uncertain in the way that a well-lit room full of attentive people makes very difficult to conceal. Nathan's answer was roughly half right. He understood the headline outputs well enough, the scenario names, the directional conclusions, the final margin ranges. He had read my summary notes carefully enough to speak to the surface of the model. From a distance his answer would have sounded credible. But Arthur was not asking from a distance. He was asking about the methodology. The precise logic behind the margin weightings. The data source that had informed the baseline. The reasoning behind 3 scenarios rather than 2 or 4. Nathan had not built the model. He had not worked through the appendix. He gave an answer that held together for about 40 seconds before it became clear to anyone listening carefully that he was navigating the edges of someone else's thinking without a map. Arthur listened without interrupting. When Nathan stopped, there was a pause. Then Arthur's gaze moved, unhurried and methodical, along the side wall where the supporting team was seated. It found me. It held for 3 or 4 seconds. Quiet and direct. the specific look of a person asking a question without words. I gave the smallest possible nod. Arthur turned back to the table and moved the conversation forward smoothly. Nobody else had seen it. Nathan had not seen it. But the balance in that room had shifted. And it was not shifting back. The next morning Arthur came to my desk. It was 9:15, earlier than I had ever seen him on the main floor without a scheduled meeting. He walked directly to my workstation without pausing anywhere else. Enough people noticed his arrival that a brief quiet moved through the room. He pulled a spare chair from the empty desk beside mine, sat down, and spoke without preamble. "I'd like your help on the next phase of the project. The client wants an implementation roadmap before their board meeting in 3 weeks." His tone was even. The tone of someone communicating a decision already made. I said I could do that. "Good." He stood, replaced the chair. Then he added, "With me directly." He said it simply. No emphasis. No glance toward Nathan's office. But those 3 words landed with a weight far beyond their size. I kept my expression steady. "Of course," I said. Arthur walked back toward the lift. The office returned to its normal noise within half a minute. But I could see Nathan in my peripheral vision. He was standing in his office doorway, completely still. He found me in the kitchen at 10:30. I was making tea. Nathan came in, checked the corridor in both directions, and let the door close behind him with a soft, deliberate click. "What exactly have you been telling him?" His voice was controlled on the surface. Underneath it something was recalculating, the quality of a person who needs to understand exactly how much ground they have lost and how fast. I turned around. "Nothing," I said. Which was the precise and complete truth. I had not gone to Arthur with any complaint. I had not suggested anything improper in any conversation I had initiated. I had not positioned myself against Nathan in any way, direct or otherwise. I had answered questions, accurately and fully, every time, about work I had built and understood completely. Nathan stared at me, searching for the lie he was certain must be somewhere. He was trying to identify the point in the sequence where I had done something he could name and push back against. There was no such point. "I've been doing my job," I said. "Same as always." He held my gaze for another moment. Then he left. I turned back to my tea. My hands were completely still. Nathan had spent 9 months confusing my silence with surrender. They are not the same thing. 3 days into the implementation work with Arthur, I found something that did not sit right. He had asked me to cross-reference the project's assumptions against the firm's historical performance data for the same client sector, standard practice before committing to a 3-year roadmap. I pulled the archived files and worked through them carefully. In 3 of Nathan's submitted reports from the previous 18 months, the figures in the final versions did not match the raw data files they were supposed to be drawn from. Nothing dramatic. Nothing large enough to catch in a routine review. A margin figure nudged up by 2 percentage points. A cost assumption revised downward without a supporting note. A growth rate rounded to something cleaner and more impressive than the actual calculation produced. Individually, each one could be dismissed as a rounding decision. Together, they told a different story. Every adjustment moved in the same direction. Every one made Nathan's reported numbers look fractionally more impressive than the underlying data supported. I verified each discrepancy carefully against the source files. I checked my own methodology for errors. I made sure my findings were completely accurate before doing anything else. Then I noted everything precisely and waited. I was not going to rush this part. 2 days later, Arthur asked for the historical files. A straightforward request, archived project records from the past 2 years, needed for implementation planning. Standard due diligence before proposing a multi-year roadmap to a client board. I organized everything carefully and provided it in full. The final submitted versions of each report. The clean source data files each report had been drawn from. The working documents, with complete edit trails and version histories, recording who had opened each file, when each change had been made, and what every figure had looked like before any amendments. I did not highlight the discrepancies. I did not attach a note pointing toward anything specific. I did not annotate or signal or draw attention to any particular comparison. I provided complete, accurate, impeccably organized documentation. Every file he had asked for, in the format best suited to a thorough and independent review. Because that was my job. I had always done my job this way, source material intact, version histories preserved, everything traceable back to its origin. This was also the single most meaningful difference between how I worked and how Nathan worked. He had spent 18 months making quiet adjustments. I had spent the same time making sure everything I produced could be fully verified. Arthur had everything he needed. What he did with it was his decision to make. The atmosphere in the office changed on a Monday. I noticed it within minutes of arriving. 2 closed-door meetings in the first hour, one in the main boardroom, one in a small fourth-floor room that was almost never used. Meredith from HR, who I had never seen on our floor during normal hours, walked past my desk at 9:15 and again just before 10. Nathan was in his office with the blinds angled, not shut, but tilted enough to make it difficult to see in from the main floor. In the afternoon there was a third meeting. Through the glass I could make out Nathan sitting across from 2 people I did not recognize. One had a laptop open. The other was writing on a notepad. I continued working. I answered emails. I kept making progress on the implementation roadmap with the focused attention of someone who has already done everything required and is simply waiting for the process to run its course. Once that afternoon, Nathan caught my eye across the floor. I gave him a small, neutral nod. He looked away first. He still believed, I think, that I had stayed quiet. That whatever he was facing had nothing to do with me directly. He had been making that same mistake for 9 months. He was still making it now. Nathan's desk was empty on a Tuesday morning. His computer was gone. The shelves had been cleared. The framed skiing photograph that had sat beside his monitor for 7 years was gone. The small plant he watered every Friday was gone, just a clean, bare surface where he had sat for 7 years. The official announcement arrived at 3 that afternoon, sent to all staff by HR, brief and carefully worded, the way these announcements always are. Nathan Briggs had left the firm. An internal review had concluded. The matter had been handled according to company policy. Over the following days, the detail moved through the office the way information always moves when the official version goes quiet. The review had identified 3 separate issues. Misrepresentation of work, specifically, the submission of analysis produced by other team members under his own name, without attribution. Data manipulation, figures in submitted reports that had been altered from the values the source data supported. Conduct, specifically, how he had managed junior members of his team. 3 findings. Any one of them career-ending alone. He had spent 9 months building what he believed was an unassailable position. He had not considered that the person doing his work was also, very quietly, keeping every receipt. A month after Nathan left, Arthur called me into his office. Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock. The 4th floor office was quieter and neater than I had expected. A wide desk, 2 chairs, a long window over the street below. Books, files, a single framed quote on the wall I did not have quite enough time to read before he gestured to a chair and I sat at. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. I looked at it. Department Analyst Lead. The title sat at the top of a full role description. I read it carefully. Client-level financial analysis. Model development. Strategic review work. And something new, team oversight responsibility for 2 junior analysts reporting directly into the role. The salary figure at the bottom was significantly higher than what I was currently earning. I looked up. Arthur's expression was the same as always. Measured, attentive, quietly direct. You've been doing this work already, he said. For quite some time, by all accounts. I thought about fluorescent lights and late evenings and a work log updated almost every night for months. I have, I said simply. Then the title should reflect it, he said. I told him I would accept before I stood up to leave. 6 months later I was standing in the same conference room where Nathan once publicly humiliated me. The setup was familiar. The long table, printed copies at each seat, water glasses down the middle. But the name on every printed copy was different now. Mine. Exactly where it had always belonged. My team was seated and ready. 3 junior consultants learning by watching. 2 client contacts who had specifically requested this firm for the next project phase. Arthur at the far end of the table, already reading through the executive summary with his usual careful attention. I thought about the 12 months that had led to this room. The late nights. The quiet anger of watching someone collect credit for work I had produced, over and over, while I stayed invisible. The financial weight that made leaving feel impossible. My mum. Callum. The slow, deliberate accumulation of evidence I had never stopped building. And I thought about what Nathan had never understood. The most powerful move available to me was never to fight him loudly, expose him dramatically, or position myself above him in any visible way. It was simply to let the most important person in the room see the work for exactly what it was, and trust that he was paying close enough attention to see it clearly. He was. I opened my folder. And I began.